Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the winter edition of the Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. We've got apologies from Councillor Hughes, who I understand is very ill, so we wish him the best for a quick recovery. No late items, Kai, is that correct? Yeah. And then any conflicts of interest to declare? Roll that into an omnibus. So we will move to accept the apologies from Councillor Hughes, note that there are no late items, and note that there are no declarations of conflict of interest in relation to this particular meeting. I'll move that, seconded by Councillor Prendergast.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I just want to make it known that I'm a member of the Aaron scheme, which is not a conflict. I don't think it would be anything, but I'll just make it.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks for noting that. So if you wouldn't mind noting that, Kai, that'd be good. Okay, let's turn now to confirm the minutes from the last meeting. We have the minutes there. Is there anything to be added or subtracted? Otherwise happy? Good. On that basis, then I'll move and His Worship will second that the minutes of this meeting be confirmed. Thanks, Kai. Let's turn now to item 52, which is the response to the letter of expectation from the water regulator in relation to the Ōtorohanga Rural Water Scheme. This is a paper from Mark. Good morning, Mark. Mark, I think the paper's, even for me, the paper's pretty self-explanatory. So is there anything in particular that you wanted to draw to our attention, and then we'll get into some questions?
Technical issues there, sorry. So no, I suppose the only thing to mention, take the report as read, is just that this report is in reply to the meeting back in March, I think, sorry, that date. And just to sort of outline where we ended up with clarifying categorization of those supplies. And just to probably reiterate that this is a report in relation to a response to a letter of expectation. So there's no actual decisions in here on the future of the scheme. So that will come in a pending council meeting, I assume, in the next couple of weeks. So the report is really just detailing how we're to respond to that letter, rather than making any decisions on the actual future of the water supplies today.
So the key question I had, Mark, and forgive me for asking what might be an amateur hour question, but you've currently got permanent boil water notices, which I understand, and you're going to continue those, but then you're going to close down the drinking water component of the scheme. And I can't understand why you do that if you've already got permanent boil water notices.
That's a good question. So I suppose the difference being is the boil water notice is a measure to safeguard a drinking water supply in a short term while we implement some changes or improvements to actually reach compliance for drinking water. So it's probably more a stopgap measure as far as the boil water notice, which is around public safety, to actually take it one step further and actually remove the drinking water component, would completely change it to an agricultural supply, which does not need to comply with drinking water standards. So it's
so where are people going to get their drinking water from?
So that would form part of the, I suppose, the plan going forward. Is fortunately we've already done this with the Ranginui water supply, and in the provisions of the Local Government Act, there's I suppose a prescribed set of steps that you would follow, and one of those is visiting each individual property and looking at what provisions they would have in place for drinking water. So on this particular scheme or supplies, there is actual people on there that don't drink this water currently, so they actually have alternative supplies ready, whether it be bore or rainwater. So we would establish that as we move forward, and until such time as that process is taking place. We sort of don't have all those answers yet, but there's, I think it's quite unique to have a rural water scheme out in a rural area that's supplying drinking water. Most sort of farming communities that within New Zealand would have their alternative water supplies for drinking already. So it's not something new to the rural sector. They're a very resilient sector of our community, and I'm sure that a lot of them would already have existing systems in place. So it's slightly different than if we were to be looking at an urban drinking water supply, to put it into context.
Councillor Prendergast, I understand that the water scheme folks are happy with what's been proposed.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so, and through this process, which Mark is spearheading, it's given the community time to come to, not to come to terms with it, it's been a work in progress for a long time, but it's a matter of getting the whole community on board, and it's been a great process. I think there's a lot of work going behind the scenes, but this is a big step, but it is inevitable as we work through the costings of any introduction. There isn't a way forward to get the costing, so this needs to be gone through in the correct manner. And I think Mark has been very sensitive to the community in that respect.
Excellent. All right, good. Thank you, Mark. Does anyone else have any questions in relation to the paper, noting the recommendation?
Yeah, Your Worship. Mr. Chairman. Yes, I sent through some questions yesterday, which I wanted, Mark, if you've had an opportunity to address those, but the first one was around the staff recommendation and clause B of that. And I just wondered whether if someone was to drink water that was non-potable or potable water, become ill, who's responsible? Is there a liability that could fall back on us for that?
So if we look back at the Ranginui, and it's shown Graham Bunn was actually quite middle of that process, so he can't be here today, but part of that process was declarations from the property owners that they would no longer consume the water. So because we're not putting it or not classifying it future tense as a drinking water, it would be just considered as any other non-potable stock water supply, and there's numerous of those scattered throughout New Zealand that simply have disclaimers as part of the water supply agreements that says this water is not for drinking or consumption, food processing, etc. So as far as liability, I wouldn't think there would be any liability on council if we had done the work correctly at the start and got those systems in place and all those disclaimers around that it's not for human consumption. So yeah.
Oh, that's good. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there was no risk for us in that. So just looking at clause 4.12, where you're talking there about the cost of a containerised plant, and the fact that we were unable to proceed with that because we couldn't secure land for it. So I guess the question there was, is that option, or was that option solely dependent upon available funding? For example, if land can be secured, is this still a viable option? And if so, is it still worth exploring?
Yes, so sort of viable option. It's feasible. Unfortunately, you'll see, I sort of did say in there for several reasons. I probably didn't go into enough detail in that paragraph, but we had several issues to overcome still with that process. One of them was securing sufficient land for a settling bond so that we could have some sort of pre-treatment plant. That has to be within vicinity of the plant. So when that was, couldn't be progressed, we looked at alternative filters. We've also had a power issue to work through. We would have had to improve the power supply. So there was deadlines attached to that funding, and there was still a lot of stuff that needed to be worked through that we couldn't sort of do in that time. So 500K is an approximation. I think looking at, for example, the power supply would have been an additional 100,000 to get it to that plant to run the plant. So yeah, I mean, I suppose any option's viable. It depends how much money you want to put in it. So,
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
But
But
yes,
I don't
sounds
think.
like it's all boiled down to just not being able to secure land that was suitable, pretty much.
Yeah, it was quite a considerable pond. We were looking at 5,000 cubic meters, I think. The reason being is we wanted to be able to buffer storm events. So then with those surface water takes, the quality of that water can change quite rapidly. So we would have had to set some bypass systems up and run a buffer pond, which would have also helped with sediment. We were probably quite early in those sort of planning stages, and if you remember, the stimulus fund program was quite tight deadlines. You had to meet some milestones, so that's why we shelved that and repurposed that money for other projects to meet those deadlines.
Okay, no, thank you for that. And the only other one I had marked was clause 5.5, was just under the heading legal. When I read that, and perhaps we might have been getting a bit tired at that stage, but I just wondered, it just seemed to be contrary. The wording of that seemed contrary to clause 6.8 and to 3B of your recommendation. So are you quite comfortable that the description under legal there is appropriate?
The context there was, that was a direction by the Ministry, the Director of Health, to impose that world water notice. So although we're not meeting the drinking water compliance standards, I suppose from a legal point of view, we are legally complying with that direction from the Medical Officer of Health. So yeah.
As long as we're comfortable. No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Right, so the recommendation is as set out in paragraph 3 on page 14, at least of my notes. I will move that, seconded by Councillor Jeffries. We're comfortable. Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. Kaya, let's turn now to the next item, which is the proposed audit of the annual report. Good morning, Brendan.
Good morning.
The recommendation is that His Worship sign the engagement letter for the audit, and that we receive the audit plan. I think we may have Matt with us and Ben. Good morning, Matt. Good morning, Ben. Thank you for joining us. Matt and Ben, I will assume that everyone has read the papers, and we'll get on to questions. Just before we do that, Matt, is there anything in particular that you wanted to draw to our attention before we get questions from colleagues?
Nothing in particular relating to the audit. Just acknowledge the LTP process is also underway at the same point in time. And I'm not sure if you're looking to cover that, Brendan, at all, or if you've briefed the committee on the latest NZTA funding point.
I had managed to brief just before the meeting started about where the we're at. As at last night, at least, there's something's changed.
Brendan, I'll just give them from an audit perspective. With the funding deficit that now exists, there's likely would need to be a qualification included in the LTP audit report. So I thought that would be useful to bring to the committee's attention. But outside of that, there's nothing else I need to bring to your attention. That the qualification really comes about because of there's now a potential deficit in terms of the budgets that's being proposed. It's as a consequence of the change in funding from NZTA. So we need to acknowledge that in our audit report that were attached to the LTP. Still work going on there. So not yet confirmed that there will be a qualification, but just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Matt, Peter here. So I got briefed on this morning. I might imagine that you will be making the point in your report that the qualification is not in any respect a reflection on the council, but rather the outcome of a decision by central government, which leads you to have to qualify the audit and the opinion because of that. Is that correct?
We will certainly work with the OAG in terms of what that qualification looks like, Peter.
Just so we're clear, Matt, my expectation would be that the blame is clearly laid at the feet of central government, not at this council, for the simple reason that many people would believe that a qualified audit speaks to poor work by the council, whereas in fact nothing is further from the truth. And I just wanted to make sure that the record reflects that, either from you, or if not from you, then it certainly would be my expectation that the CEO would be writing what I describe as a sinus clearing letter that makes it quite clear where the blame lies.
Yes, I think from what we saw last time, it's there were a number of councils that ended up in a similar position last time, Peter. I say a number, there were some that had a qualified opinion as a consequence of changes in NZT allocated funding. And what the qualification did in that instance was allude to the timing of the notification of when they were informed of it, and why the qualification exists, and that there is a deficit as a consequence of change in funding from NZTA, and not council changing the process. Just acknowledging though that the modelling then hasn't been updated to reflect that, but it should bring out that the timing of when that change was alluded to, and two, that it was a consequence of a funding change from NZTA, not a consequence of a change that council has made. So that will come through in the qualification, Peter.
That's good. I just wanted to make that point back because it's fairly important, I think, in the context of the fact that these folks sitting here are directly responsible to their community, and I think it's appropriate for there to be good context provided in terms of the decision that you've effectively been forced to make as a result of the central government decision. Okay, now that we've cleared that out of the way, Matt, was there anything, so thank you for raising that, was there anything else in relation to the specific audit that you wanted to raise? And then I'll turn to Brendan if he wanted to make any points, and then we'll move on to questions. Was there anything you or Ben wanted to say in relation to this?
Nothing in terms of, is there anything abnormal or unusual coming up? No, I don't believe there is. Having worked through the LTP process now, it's also given us a good understanding of some of the other issues that are that exist in council, or a better understanding of where council's thinking lies for the next 10 years and beyond. But there is no specific issues there. I think valuations remain a focus point, and this year we've got the land and buildings valuation that looks to be undertaken, but nothing out of the ordinary that I think I need to bring to your attention.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Brendan, is there anything that you wanted to draw to our attention before we got into questions?
No. Similar to Matt, there's nothing out of the ordinary that I can see in the audit plan or anything. It's fairly standard stuff that's been covered in terms of the audit. We've had our interim visit last week, so that's gone all right. On top of that, I think Matt's still possibly reviewing it. I don't know that. So yes, we're just waiting to get some feedback back on that once Matt's been through it. But that's gone fine. No issues at this point that I'm aware of.
Thanks, Brendan. I've got 4 questions, but I just wanted to check, do any of my colleagues have any questions in relation to the plan? Okay, well, why don't I kick off? Brendan, from your perspective, are there any material differences between what's proposed this year to what was proposed last year? Just material differences?
No, I'm pretty sure everything in the plan is pretty much the same as last year. Obviously the nature of the revaluations is different this year to what it was last year, because last year we were looking at
Yes,
water
quite.
eroding. This year's just land and buildings, and next we'll go a bit further into that. But apart from that, no, nothing material.
Okay. Second question, Brendan, there's a reference talking about land and buildings to an independent valuation.
Yeah.
I just, forgive me, because this is not my area.
Yep.
So it's our land and buildings, then
Yes.
we're getting an independent valuer
Yep.
to value them, and then we're getting them audited.
Yes.
Why?
So I guess the independent valuation is, we don't have the expertise in-house to do this, particularly for land and buildings. Land and buildings, the infrastructure, the roading, the three waters, we're able to do that in-house through the software that we have.
Right.
That had revaluation modules in it, we can load in the adjusters and stuff.
Yeah.
That. Land and buildings is a lot more technical because it uses sales data and a whole heap of other stuff that I don't even understand.
Okay.
So that's why we use QV in this case to do those for us. With the ones we do in-house, we usually have to do the independent peer review anyway to check the work we've done. So by going with independent QV doing it, we don't need that extra step of the peer review.
See, you almost had me until you used the word independent peer review.
Right.
Because we're going to have a conversation next year about why the heck we would have an independent peer review when we're already getting the thing audited. It seems to me to be a duplication in fees, but we'll have that conversation next year. The point you're making in relation to land and buildings is we don't have the capability in-house, and therefore I can understand that it makes sense to get an independent person to do the valuation, which then gets audited as part of the progress. Okay, thank you for that. But please be aware, I'm going to come back to you on this independent peer review next year. Then the next question I had, Matt, I signaled this was a question I was going to ask you. There's a reference to an audit in relation to ESG and climate change. Why? Why is this being audited?
Peter, it's a point of consideration in terms of the audit. I wouldn't say we're doing an audit on climate separately, but the reason why we have included it in there, and there is, council is not mandated to report on ESG related matters, yet there are some councils that are required to report on, say, GHG emissions at the moment and ESG related matters, given the requirements under the NZX. Ōtorohanga District Council is not. However, it's an important point of consideration for the audit because of areas, say, an example might be the useful lives of assets. We need to consider whether useful lives of assets are appropriate. And we have seen this play out in, say, port companies that are owned by councils, where they've made a commitment to reduce their GHG emissions, or they are committed to being carbon neutral, say by 2040 or 2050. And as a consequence of that, they've had to reduce the useful lives of some of the underlying assets because of the time that commitment rolls around. The useful life of the asset is actually shortened as a consequence of that. And so what we saw through the LTP would be in council, for Ōtorohanga District Council, and how that plays out is where culverts are being replaced at the moment, those culverts are actually larger now to cope with frequent storm events or the severity of those storm events. So it's making sure we understand that, and then we can play it out in terms of the audit process when we look at, say, the useful lives of the assets. Are they still appropriately being considered in the context of what might exist in 30, 50 or 80 years time? Because the council does hold very long life assets. So that is an example of why climate is considered, not to say useful lives of assets is the only consideration. I would say, Peter, it's not a deep dive. We understand how council are thinking about climate, and that's where, having worked through the LTP process, we've actually got a lot of good information there that we can leverage off from the LTP process in terms of bringing that through into the audit file and demonstrating how we've thought about climate. But this is a requirement that you'll see come through in audits going forward as a consequence of the likely impact to climate on organisations, and how that plays out, particularly for organisations that have longer lived assets or other areas that need to be considered in relation to ESG.
Sorry, I thought you were making a point in relation to climate. ESG is a completely different, it's a completely different frame, right?
Yes, so climate change and ESG are different, although, climate does fall into ESG. You are correct.
Yeah.
But we do consider probably more climate change in terms of ESG, so that title there could probably be updated. It is more a climate change consideration of the implications in terms of the audit process and how management and council are then considering that in terms of areas like the useful lives of assets and how that's being thought through.
Okay, so if I just play that back, what you're really saying is there is a relevance in the context of audit in the climate change space because considerations by councils as to what infrastructure changes are appropriate given the increasing number of extreme weather events is a relevant consideration. So I get that point. What I would say, and I'm sensitive about ESG, is that I can't see the relevance here, speaking as a director of a wealth management company. The reason for that is that your ESG is not necessarily my ESG. It's not necessarily Brendan's ESG. We all have different perspectives that we bring to bear in relation to the various components of ESG, which is why I'm quite sensitive about so-called audit in that area. But I do understand the point you make in relation to the impact on infrastructure policies as a result of extreme weather events and what impact that might have in terms of the life of assets. So thanks for that explanation. Okay. Then finally, a question before I go back to colleagues to see if they have any other questions. Brendan, forgive me, there's a reference at page 53 of my papers in relation to prior year unadjusted differences.
Oh, yes.
Was that $45,000 actually charged?
Off the top of my head, I don't believe so. There was a little bit of a charge, but I don't think it's 45K. I can't really cross it off my head. No.
Okay. Would you mind checking that for
Yep.
us? And that is
Right. We were actually able to get a discount on the GST because we tax pulled the thing through PwC, so there was some extra savings.
Okay.
So yeah, I can work out that.
Thank you. Okay, I think I've successfully ad-libbed long enough to give the rest of you an opportunity to think about whether there's any other questions you want to ask. Is everyone otherwise happy? Okay, well, on that basis, Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, Matt. How many years is it that you have been auditing the Ōtorohanga District Council?
In terms of myself, I've been the appointed auditor. This will be my third year coming up as the appointed auditor on Ōtorohanga District Council. Deloitte, and we're appointed on our individual capacities, but Deloitte has been your audit provider for well in excess of 10 years now.
2004, I was there when Deloitte became the auditor for Ōtorohanga. I was actually close, so I know the date.
So you're a gamekeeper turned poacher.
So does that mean that your systems are so well set up that you are as cost effective as you can be? It's really where I'm going with that. It just seems to me that like bringing in the extra reporting, etc., with the ESG, and that you would be mindful of keeping it to a minimum, as in it's not necessary for us to be doing it quite yet. And I do understand the point that Peter has made, but it is a very significant cost for any council.
Yes, absolutely. It is a material cost in terms of the audit fee that gets charged to the council, and certainly understand that in terms of cost effectiveness, our systems and processes are continually evolving, and we try to seek out efficiencies wherever we possibly can. The challenge we face is as we seek out these efficiencies, the requirements of what we need to do and what's is being put onto us by the standard setters tend to incrementally increase throughout that period. So as we introduce efficiencies, we try and negate some of those additional requirements that are pushed onto us by the standard setters, or that we need to consider with efficiencies. So we are continually trying to make sure the process is efficient as possible, but also acknowledging at the same time, over the last 10 years, there's been a significant shift in terms of what we are required to do in the audit process. And unfortunately, that rate of change continues to move at pace. But we are doing, whatever we can to try and minimise the cost that we need to on charge to council.
Just on the, thank you very much for making that point, Councillor Prendergast. I think I would make the observation, Matt, and this won't surprise you, that if the standard setters were actually responsible for paying for the audit, I suspect we would see far fewer standards, because what happens here is the standard setters set the standards. You've got no obligation but to audit, and the council's got no obligation but to be audited, and then the ratepayers have got no obligation but to pay. So you can understand, and I'm sure if you don't, you'll be probably getting this message from a whole range of people, that no one really likes this process, and very few people see much value in it. We seem to be held hostage by standard setters. Anyway, I think that's probably about as far as we need to go on that subject. So the recommendation is that the Risk and Assurance Committee recommend His Worship the Mayor sign the engagement letter and receive the audit plan. I'm not sure we really want to recommend you sign this thing. We've got no choice. My suggestion would be that we authorise His Worship the Mayor to sign the engagement letter and receive the audit plan. With that minor amendment, is anyone prepared to second that? Councillor Jeffries? Okay. Matt, Ben, thank you. We appreciate the work that you do. We recognise that in many respects you are beholden to the Office of the Auditor General and the standards setters. We wish they would front up and pay some of the additional costs we continue to bear, but we do appreciate the work that you do, the professionalism that you provide, and the fact that you're prepared to front up, and we appreciate that. So thank you very much for that, and we continue to hope that we can continue to work well and efficiently with you. Thank you both.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time, everyone, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks all.
Okay. Brendan, thank you. I think we have now over to move to the next paper, Kyle, which is, it's a lot to work through. Thanks, Doug.
Mr. Chairman, I raised questions in email yesterday, which were copied to you. Look, I'm quite happy to wait for responses to those from staff, as long as it's copied back out to the committee, rather than debate them here today, if that's appropriate.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Brendan, you're happy with that?
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to answer now. Thanks.
Or would you prefer, Councillor, would you prefer the answers now, or would you?
Well, if staff have had an opportunity to address them, then let's have.
Okay, well, let's do that.
Yep.
Thanks, Brendan, for getting that done.
Yep.
And then I've just got, I think, one question that I didn't quite understand, which won't surprise you. But let's deal with Councillor Jeffrey's questions first.
Okay, sure. So the first question that we had on this item was around the roading asset and the adjusters that we're using. And just the question was, given the escalation in costs, the adjusters seem light, are we satisfied that they're correct? So these are the adjusters that are provided by NZTA. They're publicly available on the website. It's based off Statistics New Zealand information. It's the same adjusters that we used last revaluation and the evaluations that we did last year. I guess they may look like a lot of the big adjustment was sort of 3 years ago and maybe 2 years ago. So that's why when you look at it now, in my report, that it's a bit lighter now than you might expect because most of the actual cost was more upfront. And so it's actually tailing off a bit now in terms of that increase. There are still increases, obviously, but not as bad as they were. So
This is
we're,
in relation to the roading assets?
yes,
Would you mind, councillor Jeffries, if I just, because my question was in relation to 4.6?
Yep.
Forgive me, I didn't understand what was happening here. Would you mind just very slowly walking me through clause 1.6 so I can understand what you guys actually do?
yeah, okay. So, so when we're doing the revaluations of the rating assets, water's slightly different, but
Yeah.
the same concept. So we will go and get the adjusters from NZTA. So these adjusters, they release, well, they release them every month, but they're only updated with quarterly information.
It's an adjuster of what?
So they release it predominantly for adjusting contracts. So with a contract, for example, if you've got a 3 or 4 year roading contract, you probably have a cost adjustment to reflect the increase in the price of bitumen.
Right, okay.
So these adjusters using the business cost price index, whatever it's called. The stats does, NZTA takes things, they break it down into different components, labour, materials, various bits and pieces. And then they release them on a monthly basis. Bitumen's a separate one, which is updated monthly, but everything else is updated quarterly, but they still release them every month.
So where I got confused, Brendan, forgive me for jumping in. Staff obtained the NZTA indices, then looked at NZTA's adjusters.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's the same thing.
are they the same
Yeah.
thing?
I probably use the word adjusters.
Look, I suspect you were
independent,
probably
equivalent.
looking to check to see whether I was actually reading the materials.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's fine.
I've
Now I
interchanged the words.
understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, councillor Jeffries, let's go through the rest of
Okay.
councillor Jeffries'
Yep.
questions.
So yeah, so in terms of are they appropriate? Yes, we're happy with those, the appropriate figures to use for the fair value assessment. The second question you had was around.
Sorry,
yeah.
just one further question. So have audit actually seen those at this stage?
No.
Yeah.
So,
But you're confident that they'll,
Yeah.
they'll have to accept those?
I mean, yes, at the end of the day,
Yep.
it's council's decision as to whether we want the revaluation or not, and then they think we should, that becomes an argument. It becomes a qualified opinion, something like that.
Well, the reason I raised the bank, and I guess it's pretty obvious, I guess, that it's been 2 years.
Yeah.
And those percentage movements seem very light to me personally.
Yeah.
With what's been going on in terms of cost escalations during those last 2 years. But if that's, are those the indices or the adjusters that have been used by NZTA and have been used by all the other local authorities, then maybe
Yep, I would assume most local authorities use this, and Becca uses the same ones when they do their adjustments. I think I've talked about this previously, Colab's the process of doing a whole sort of regional wide revaluation of roading assets project. And so these are the same just as they would use for that as well. This is running a RAM system, so yeah, these are the right adjusters to use. In terms of your other question, was around would it be better to recognise the increased fair value associated with increase in depreciation rather than leaving it a year, having a spike? I mean, there's two trains of thought on that. Yes, one might make more sense to smooth the depreciation increases. That does obviously then lead us down the path of potentially able to do a revaluation every year, which has associated costs of potentially an independent peer review, which sounds like discussed next year. But yeah, so it takes a lot of staff time obviously to do a revaluation as well. With this collab project, that may reduce or maybe more streamlined, because what we have, we'll have data from the whole region we can draw on to double check out costs and all that sort of stuff. So there may be some potential savings. I guess at this point, I would probably suggest that we don't. What we usually do, because when you do a revaluation, the depreciation impact you don't know till after the year, so it's too late to put in the budget for the next year. So we always treat the depreciation over and above what was budgeted as non-funded in that first year, and then reflected in the annual plan, long-term plan for the following year. to reflect the funding that we may need to put that. Obviously with our long-term plan, we're also reducing the funding for the first couple of years. So I think doing a revaluation this year to reflect it next year probably wouldn't have much of an impact because of the reduced depreciation funding as well. So I think in this case, it's probably fine to not do it, but yeah, that may be a discussion to have. And obviously it depends what's happening in the economy in terms of inflation, that sort of stuff. If it's trending down and probably like that, then the spikes might not be as bad. So we're going back to 3 years.
Right, and just one further question around that, agreement is that, so what percentage of, we fund the depreciation on roading? Yes. Yes, so what percentage of that funding of depreciation was met by NZTA?
So the last LTP, we were funding only 39% because our fire rate was 61% on the sub-base base course and the sealed surfaces of the roads. For this LTP, you may recall, we changed it, so we're now funding only 37% because our fire rate's increased to 63% of all operating assets. Yeah. Including street signs, parking. So yes, we're only basically funding 37% of our depreciation costs.
Right, so to put it in Janet and John stuff for me, of the $212,000 increase in depreciation, we'd be meeting 37%.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Jeffrey. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, any other questions in relation to the paper? So the recommendation is that we agree the carrying values are not materially different from the fair value of those assets. I will move that, seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Excellent. Thank you very much, Brendan.
Thank you.
Let's move now to Noah's paper on page 67. Noah, good morning. Welcome.
How are we doing?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your paper. Is there anything, Noah, that you particularly wanted to draw to our attention before we get into questions?
Nothing in particular, just probably the key thing is, or one thing in particular would be that in terms of our incidents and near misses, they seem to be tracking as if we're getting a high results in the previous 6 years. But in both cases, they can be explained, or one requires a little bit further investigation, but there's clear justification in those areas probably. So I wouldn't be concerned about that, but that would be my opinion.
Excellent, thank you. Do any colleagues have any questions that they'd like to raise with Noah? I just have one. Noah, I note, and I'm not surprised that you want to review the KPIs. That makes perfect sense for someone like you with your experience and expertise. I'm interested in terms of two things. First, when you would want to undertake that review in terms of your own work program, when have you got that down for?
Right now, the priority is get my offsider on board, who we've hired in as an indicative start date of the 8th of July and get her up to speed. And then the next focus would be health and safety. So after that, so I'll be hoping to do some sort of review of that in August, September at this stage.
Kyle, when's the next committee meeting? September. I wondered how you would feel, Noah, about bringing your indicative KPIs to the committee to take soundings. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact that Councillor Hughes in particular has got a real interest in health and safety, and I just wondered whether it might be useful just to take some soundings before you lock them down. How would you feel about that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Good. Do any of my colleagues have any questions about Noah's paper?
No, just out of curiosity more than anything, Mr. Chairman, I just wondered what the hazard was at Memorial Park. What
just a tripping hazard. So when you take the bollard out, there's a metal plate that stands out of the ground. You can trip on it. It's a tiny little hole. So all we're going to do is put some fence over it so you can't trip them.
Okay, right. That's okay. Fix it.
Easy. It's an easy fix.
Good, excellent. Okay, so the recommendation is that we receive Noah's report. I'll move that, second by his worship. Thank you very much, much appreciated. Okay. We are tripping through the papers. The next one is IELTS. Phil, good morning, welcome, thank you.
Morning.
Thank you for your paper. Tony, good morning. So the proposal is that we receive the report. Obviously, a tricky time and a lot of work's been done, so thank you for that. Obviously, the rubber hits the road in August with a pretty important review. I wonder, I think we'll take the paper as read, we'll get on to questions shortly. But Tony and Phil, from your perspective, are you satisfied that your team is match fit for August?
Well, certainly since our last audit, we've built on those processes and are continuing our preparation for the full audit in August. So the team's on board certainly, and we're motivated to actually get to that point and looking forward to it in some ways, I guess. But I'm really confident that we're as well prepared as we'll ever be.
There's nothing like an existential threat to motivate us there.
Sorry.
There's nothing like an existential threat to motivate.
Absolutely. It's the greatest motivator of all.
Absolutely. Okay, that's good. Tony, from your perspective.
Yeah, I would also chair that then, I guess what that fills today is degrees of participants. So we would that was on that, but I can understand. But in addition to this courses now, we see other projects that are good. So what we should then on that, obviously so one point that we're making this project and so I guess helping with some advice success and advice for delivery of this.
Is there are there some cultural aspects to this, Tony and Phil, that you are addressing and have had the need to address in order to bring about the change that you wanted to see?
I think there's a perception amongst some people that it's something that is done to us rather than we're receptive about. That's not the case, I don't think, in our situation. I think that we understand there is a lot that comes out of this that's a really good perception for the public and also for us in our learning. I mean, we never stop learning in our game. It's a moving target, really. So I think that attitude amongst the staff is starting to move a little bit. I see a lot of people putting their heart and soul into this.
Right, excellent. Look at,
It's chair, just in my first lines.
yes,
So if we make a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finance approach seems to be different. Specifically, that last night we had a couple of discussions. To be honest with you, and it is apparent that finance is looking more for issues with this issue. I think just not just in this council, but other councils that work in the question is the other one is actually the building clusters and businesses. So with IELTS, they'll be looking across multiple customers. They might be the same process as picked up and give different responses. What they do. So we have to do that with the video.
yeah. Okay. That's incredibly diplomatically put. Do any colleagues have any questions?
Can I just ask, do we pay for that? We pay for that review from audit? So what you're telling me quite intrigues me. It sounds like we could be paying for something that we don't necessarily need to pay for, which is.
What we need to pay for it is it's the mandatory requirement as a building authority. But the quality of the water and the delivery to the is something that we're on good to do.
Yeah, unfortunately, all of the auditors come from within the industry. Not from an external group. They don't exist, they only exist within the industry, so we're actually being audited by our own peers to an extent, and there's a good side to that, and there's also a downside.
Yeah.
And a lot of it we're concerned about is the training of those particular technical experts that IONS are using. The IONS auditors are fine, and they have their own international taken to audit, but the people they use have to be from within our industry, because they're the only people that can actually give, look at us and say, "Hey, you guys are doing your job." And so they're good, bad, and indifferent. You strike a bad auditor or a bad technical expert in terms of whatever bad things, you can get a totally different audit result out of that. And that's a little concern for us.
Yeah, well, I'll be concerned for all of us, I would think. It sort of makes you wonder whether we're paying to train some of these people. But anyway, just one other question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. 4.5.1, you talk about a long-term solution for quality manager and so on, and you're in discussions with neighbouring councils, collab. How far down the track are you with that?
So, shared service is something that's, I guess, the three councils are, if we don't have property, so the problem with three councils is that there's, that's it's a group a sponsor, and if next stage to get seated enforcement, that gets endorsement, they can move it back to our respective councils and develop projects. So the options range from sharing resources. So we've got building control across the three councils, sharing that shared quality person across the three councils, right through to one piece of it's not an option.
By three, you're talking about Waitomo, Waipa, and Ōtorohanga. Thanks, Councillor Jeffries. Any other questions? Okay, so Councillor Jeffries will move and Councillor Prendergast will second. Good luck, guys. Hope it goes well, and we look forward to hearing the result in September. Thank you for your report in the meantime. Okay, Billy, good morning. Thank you very much for your report. Welcome. We will take the report as read. I hope that you will be pleased that I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and read the report from the last time you talked to us. So I hope you now realise that that report was not wasted and that effort wasn't wasted. So it looks to me like there's been some real progress, and when you look at the SAM compliance results, it's certainly improved.
Yeah.
One of the things, Billy, that you'd mentioned in the last report was that in relation to alternative fibre connections, you were looking at Starlink and other options as possibilities.
Yep.
Nothing mentioned, I don't think, in this report. Where have you got to with that?
The situation is largely the same in the sense that the fibre options certainly have been improved over the last 12 months. We were looking at other options like a 4 to 5G connection using that, but I think really the only option open to us that's sensible, if you like, is a Starlink connection. We were just discussing it again just the other day in respect to the civil defence exercise that occurred in here.
Yep.
Just last week, and that our network, our Wi-Fi network basically got overloaded as a consequence, and given some serious thought to essentially putting our Wi-Fi network on Starlink as a kind of backup circuit. I think really that's the only option we've got now.
So presumably this is the civil defence headquarters. for emergencies.
Yep.
Which means that, without the ability to communicate, everyone looks like a puppet.
Yes.
So, given the fact that we're moving into the tricky season in terms of weather, is there any plan to do something about that this winter season?
Oh, I think so, yeah. We've already established a Starlink connection, weirdly, over at Carfield. Again, because it was the only option for a connection to the Carfield Hall, and that seems to have gone well enough. I could, I suppose, argue that I've been personally testing it at home, and it's worked well enough for my requirements, and so I've got no reason to think that it would work here very, very well.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, so, I guess from a risk perspective, the council wouldn't want to be in a situation where it's trying to run a civil defence operation and it's got no Wi-Fi.
No, I mean, the Starlink connection would be a secondary connection in that sense. It would be assuming, of course, that none of the other communication got broken during that civil defence exercise. We're assuming we've still got a fibre connection. Then we've still got that network, and we would have the guest Wi-Fi running over Starlink in order to basically spread the load, because it's clear that our fibre connection isn't up to having a number of people on the network.
Right, right. Is there a plan for another exercise, Billy, to test that?
I'm not aware of one at this stage, no.
So a couple of other, one question and a comment, just to congratulate you on most improved cybersecurity at the Eldrum Awards. That's really excellent, considering where I look at where you started from, which was a lower than average position from a cybersecurity perspective to now bring up the average. So well done. Thank you for that. And then, Lee, I just wondered what I would find useful the next time. In April last year, you had your risk register, and then you've got the risk register this year. But what I can't see is changes.
Oh.
So it's impossible for me to read one risk register, see what's changed from previously. I think it would be really useful if we could get some trend information in terms of what's changed from an up and down perspective. Would be really helpful for next time if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you. Is there anything else before we go to questions from colleagues? Is there anything in particular that you wanted to draw to our attention? Billy, anything in particular you wanted to?
Yeah, I think the one thing that is going to be a significant focus for us over the next 12 months, if not more, is the whole subject of document management or information management.
Yeah.
It's one of the latter items in the report, but it's probably the most relevant right at this point in time. We have a document management system that has been in the organisation for a number of years, but it would be fair to say it is not well patronised by staff, and there's a variety of reasons for that. It's not a great tool, but it could be better, and it is not always easy to find what you're expecting to find in it. It has limitations in terms of its ability to search. And as a consequence, people have started to store their documents in other repositories such as OneDrive, and on their Surface tablets. And I can't blame them for that, because it's the path of least resistance, really. So the focus will be in that area to basically improve the functionality of our document management system, set some policies and guidelines about how we manage electronic documents, and do probably a significant amount of training. And the intention is also to make the file structure within the document management system a lot more relevant to today, because as you can imagine, when the software was purchased a dozen years ago, it was set up as required at the time, but those requirements have now changed. The other issue, of course, is that staff have changed over that period of time, and bad habits have crept in. So there's no real, not trying to, assign any blame to anybody or anything in particular. The tool is what it is. But we've kind of drifted away from it, and I think we just need to put some focus on that, get it right again.
So there's a whole bunch of questions flow from that. The loss of institutional knowledge through use of different storage mechanisms is a worry.
Yes.
In terms of the document management system itself, Billy, is it redeemable in your judgment? You mentioned it's been in place for a dozen years.
Ooh, there you go. I think it's redeemable. My recommendation to the senior leadership team was that it's the tool we've got, and I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try and make it better. There are alternatives, but I can tell you from bitter experience that no one likes the alternatives either. You buy one, you think the tool you've got is rubbish, so you buy another one, and it's got its own flaws as well. So before we go spending a lot of money and a lot of time finding another tool, I think we owe it to ourselves to try and make the tool that we've got work.
And I imagine, and this is obviously been an issue for the chief executive, but there's a kind of, in order for this to work, there's got to be a carrot and a stick, doesn't there? That you've got the existing system, maybe policies need to be put in place to prevent people, as a matter of policy, from storing stuff in other storage mechanisms.
That is precisely the first step, in actual fact.
Okay, well, that's a question. Maybe that's something we can talk to Tanya about when we have our session with Tanya after this.
Through you, Chair, it is one of the 5 things on my risk list that I'll talk to the committee about. So yeah,
Right.
It's good that we had this conversation.
Okay, thanks, Billy. That's a great great comment. I come from an environment of egotistical maniacs, and the only way within the firm that we were able to ensure that people use the document management system was to prevent people using any other system. And that worked for a law firm of lawyers. Does anyone else have any questions? Bill? Okay, so sounds like we've got a plan in place in relation to the use of Starlink, particularly in emergency circumstances. Sounds like next time around with the risk register, you'll give us some trend analysis so we can see what's changed since the last report. And it sounds like hopefully there'll be a better story to tell about the document management system, because from an institutional perspective, there's a massive risk in people hiding off and storing stuff all over the show. Okay, excellent. Everyone else happy? Good. Thank you so much, Billy. Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Back to Mark for what surely is the main event. Capital projects report. I thought we did, but just a second. So the last time, Mark, I asked you to make some changes to the executive summary, and you have, and I'm really grateful to you. I thought this was a really good report, so thank you. Does anyone have any questions of Mark? This is a pretty good result in terms of capital project delivery.
No, just through you, Chair, just one comment. Well done. So that seems to be coming in very well.
From memory, Brendan, my understanding is that the average performance of council's across the sector in terms of delivery of capital projects is about 80%, is that right?
That sounds about right, I think. Maybe
So you'd be above average, Mark, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think the last time we reported, we were sitting around that 80. Yeah, I don't recall the exact number, but yeah, I think we're sitting around that area. That will probably be something we'll put together in the next month or so where we actually landed, because this report is really just detailing those higher level capital projects. There is a lot of other little minor projects that will build into that
Right,
overall figure, but
because you focused on material projects as we previously discussed. Okay, that's good, but it looks like you're only off track in relation to one of those, which is in relation to the bridge, isn't it?
yeah, correct, and that's just purely a timing thing.
Timing issue. Yep.
Yeah, but if I may, there's one correction I need to make.
Things were going so well.
And my apologies, I'm not sure what happened.
Hopefully it's an
Ross-
upside correction.
No, Ross actually alerted to me this morning and I had a quick look at it. So something's happened in my table at the end with the actuals. You'll see some of those numbers, just quite unusual. So I have got the actual numbers in front of me. I can redo that table if that's needed, or I can just talk to them now.
So is there a material change in terms of the actual on any of these items?
Just in that table, it's just the numbers. You'll see on the reseal program, it's still showing an actual of 600,000. It's actually 1.7.
Right.
The low cost, low risk is showing 1.4. It's actually 2.1. And the rehabs should be 1.33, not 1.36. So it's just, I'm not sure what happened there. Doesn't really change the context of the report. It just means that those numbers don't reflect the actual budgets, which they should have done. That's my apologies there. And so the wastewater upgrade is 2.7. So technical issue there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jeffries.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mark, hey, congratulations. I think it's an excellent report, reads very well, and I think you and your team have done a great job, so well done. Just a couple of quick questions. In that table, the column budget forecast, I assume that's 24, 25, is that right? That's, yeah, the one you were just talking about was the actuals on.
Yeah, that's at the completion of this 23-24.
The budget forecast then is, okay, it wasn't clear to me what year that related to.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
this financial year.
This financial year, okay, thank you. And just one thing that wasn't actually specifically mentioned in your report, I'm just curious, Mangamahoe, I know that we had some issues with Mangamahoe and so on. That's all done, dusted and signed, sealed and?
Yeah, from what I understand, there was some work carried out near the sort of western end. That's what you're referring to, and that's been completed.
It has, yeah, because that was a project that for whatever reason just seemed to go on and on and on, didn't it?
Yeah.
The contractors had to be pulled back at one stage to try and complete it.
There were some issues around timing for the traffic management at the intersection that did put some delays on that. Yeah. Yeah.
It's all right, no problem. Right, okay. Anyone else got anything else? Excellent, Mark, thank you very much, much appreciated. So let's turn, I think what we might do, Claire, if it's okay with you, we'll go to the end of this topic, take a break. Lunches. Okay. So, Brendan, thank you. This is the fixed asset addition and disposal process. As I read this, the headline news is you think you've got this done, ready for the audit.
Yeah, effectively. So Emma, who would have been here, if she wasn't off sick today. She's done a lot of work on her side of things to get everything, the asset side ready to go. We've got a few examples now that we're working through, going through the process of putting those in, refining little bits and pieces, but no, we're pretty happy that it'll be in and working, probably still with improvements to make by the end of this month. For the whole next month.
So the whole point of this is to stop you having to tear your hair out just before the end of the financial year.
Yes.
Okay, good. And it sounds like you've got a good working arrangement between sales and marketing.
Yes, our two teams actually sit right next to each other. So we're constantly.
Brilliant. Excellent. Does anyone have any questions about this? This looks like good progress. Good. Thank you, Brendan. Right. So we'll receive that report. So I'll move that. Councillor Jeffries will second it. Let's turn now to the climate change response plan. This is for endorsement. This is Ross's paper. Ross, thank you. Is there anything, Ross, you particularly want to draw to our attention? I had some questions which I asked you offline, so I'm now happy with the plan. Do any of my colleagues have any questions about the plan? Okay. Is there anything in particular that you'd want to point out, Ross?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just 4 points. So just a reminder that this before you today is one part of the climate change response plan framework that was previously agreed. The other part being the externally focused component, which is with our community, and there's obviously a crossover between the two, particularly in the area of assets, infrastructure and resilience. The second thing is I'm proposing that the framework elements that are presented in this proposed plan are consistent with the community focused part of the response plan, particularly in relation to goals 1 and 3. So I'm anticipating that they will be identical in relation to what ultimately appears in the community plan. Of course, previously in relation to goal 2, which is internally focused around carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, that is an element that is not going to be covered within the community plan. I think it's worth highlighting that what's presented largely builds on what we're already doing. So it's bringing together, I guess, a number of what have been quite discrete elements and bringing them into one place. And just a point, and I should say that some of those have economic drivers rather than just climate change mitigation drivers. And then the last point is, at the moment, and I think Matt Lang alluded to it, there aren't any statutory requirements on council in terms of things like reporting and meeting targets, unlike elements or areas of the central government sector. So in a way, and we're in a space of, I guess, potential policy change with the coalition government. So I've got a bit of a holding reference in the action plan that says whatever comes our way in terms of statutory requirements, we'll address those, I think, by 2027 or as the legislation may stipulate, which might be a shorter time frame.
So, Ross, you touched on the one issue I have with the plan. When I think about the elements of the impact of climate change or extreme weather events, there are essentially 3 parts to it, as you rightly point out in the goals. There's an element, a very minor element, I would have thought, in relation to emissions reduction by the council. You've made, which makes perfect sense that you'll continue to take a common sense approach to cost of savings, particularly in the energy space, whenever that makes sense. So that's perfectly sensible. You've talked about issues around helping the community build its own resilience in terms of climate change, which is not really a part of this plan. And then the final part is really about making sure that the infrastructure for which the council is responsible is sufficiently resilient to be dealing with increasingly extreme and greater and more regular weather events. The one question I have is that we say that, and this is the last page of the report, adaptation planning for critical council assets and infrastructure in place and incorporated into asset management planning and long-term plan by June 2027. And my question is, I would have thought between the councillors who understand their communities, Mark who understands the asset base, the infrastructure base of the council, it's a genuine question. Why is it going to take until June 2027 to start to load into your planning program the kinds of additional adaptation changes that you need to make in order to create greater resilience in your infrastructural assets to deal with extreme events?
Right, so through Mr. Chair, the reference to June 27 is simply the long-term plan milestone. So whether it's a factor of being able to more appropriately or better word that statement, I suspect it might be given the nature of your question. So we would see that manifested ultimately in the long-term plan that is adopted in June 2027. But I would anticipate long before that, with what we already have, already know now, and what we will be working through as part of this process, those things will be progressively brought into our asset management plans, for example.
I beg your pardon. Now I think I understand. So basically you're going through an LTP process right now, which is 24 to 34. Yes. And what you're really saying is the next iteration of the LTP is the 27 to 37 iteration. Yes. So we expect to be fully loaded into that LTP. But there'll be a lot of preparatory work that you'll be doing in terms of your annual plans, your infrastructure plans, your financing strategies to make sure that that's all set to go into your 27 and to 37 LTP. Yes. Now I understand. Okay. Good. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Hopefully a bit smarter than that. Good. Okay. Excellent. So we are going to endorse the plan. I'm happy to move that, seconded by His Worship. Thanks, Ross. Right. Let's turn now to why don't we folks, let's take a 5-10 minute break and then we'll get on to the outstanding management letter points. Thank you.
we dial through it. I don't think it's, I don't think
Great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's turn now to the next item, which is the outstanding management letter reports, management letter points from the last year's audit. So we're down from 18 to 7. Brendan, before we get to questions.
No, I think, obviously the loan receivable, the Kiwi House, Graham was going to provide a verbal update. I believe someone else is doing that now, possibly. So where that's at.
We'll be dealing with that in public excluded, I think.
Yeah, that's, that's fine, cool. Yeah, and everything else is pretty much as written in the report. There's been no updates on any of those. So I wrote this a week ago.
So in relation to this question of legislative matters.
Yes.
I think I previously raised the question about whether something like comply with, which is a model that Waikato District Council uses, might be right for a small entity like Ōtorohanga District Council.
Yes, you did raise that. I guess now that we've got Rebecca in the business improvement analyst role, this is something she'll look at, because obviously you can get the software, but then you got to have the processes around who's monitoring all that sort of stuff. So I think she's going to take on that as one of her many list of things since she started the role that she's working through. Like I say there, it's probably slightly lower priority project than some of the other ones, simply because we do have subject matter experts on most of the sort of things. You know, I'm always keeping on top of changes to financial legislation. I'm sure Mark's keeping on top of water legislation, all that sort of stuff. And you have things like the listservs and stuff, so we're always getting sending out information tied to it over GNZ as well about legislative changes we should be aware of. So I guess we have some processes in place that might be sufficient from our point of view. But we're happy that the process we have in place now are probably sufficient until Rebecca gets a chance to actually do the processes.
So what I would suggest to you, Brendan, and I'm conscious of the fact that you're an ex-auditor, so you'll understand this better than me. I've always been a big fan of being on the front foot, of setting the agenda. I just wondered whether, in relation to something like this, you say it's a lower priority, and I accept your judgment. I just wonder, in terms of the way in which you communicate with the auditors, get onto the front foot on this one to say, this is something that we're doing. We see this as a lower priority relative to other things. Our expectation is that we'll have this in place by X. Whatever X might be, it might be this financial year, it might be next financial year, it might be the following financial year. But the idea is that you're being proactive in terms of saying, we've got it into a work program. We may not necessarily get it done for next year. So please don't hammer us in the audit for next year because it's in the work program. We've prioritized it, but this is when we expect to have it done by. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, and that's obviously something when if it comes up in the letter again this year, we're in our response, because the part of the letter is that we put out management responses, we'll articulate that response.
So we'll have this conversation with Tanya when we sit down with the chief executive after the meeting. But I'm really keen for you and Graham to take pass a critical eye over audit observations. That you can't fault the fact that they will always adopt a counsel of perfection, but you don't have the luxury of having unlimited resource. So it's really, I've always thought it was really important in terms of the management response to audit suggestions, that where there is diminishing value relative to the cost, that you push back. So I really urge you to do that, because at the moment, we've still got 7 things to be done out of 18. Whereas, I think we would have all preferred there to be none to be done. Okay, Does anyone else have any questions of Brendan? All right, so we'll receive this report. I'll move that and seconded by councillor Jeffries. Turning now to the next item, which is outstanding debtors. Good morning. Thank you for your continued efforts. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to highlight about where we're at with debtors at the moment?
Nothing, I guess, in particular that isn't already bought. I mean, what's at a high level, we obviously won't go into specific detail about specific things for privacy reasons in an open meeting. I guess there was a question last time regarding the disputes tribunal, and we could go down that path. It's literally in their on their website or something that says that it can't be used. We can't deal with disputes about rates. We can't actually use them as a
Okay, thank
avenue.
you. Thanks for addressing that.
Yeah, so we do have to go down the other avenues like mortgage share, demands, and then rating sales and that sort of thing. I guess we are in the process of, this was a question that Councillor Jeffries asked as well, like in relation to that last meeting. We have begun the process of rating sales with about 3 through our debt management consultants. Yeah. So they're in the process of going through all the legislative things we have to do to follow the process properly. There is a bit of time that it takes, obviously, but they're doing their bits at the moment on that. So we have started that process. As Graham has said to me in the past, you go down this process and you probably won't actually get to the point of end up selling because they'll magically find the money. Sell the property.
That's the magic of a process.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it's obviously the last thing we want to do,
Of course.
to sell the house, but
Of course.
yeah, by starting the process, we should be pretty good. And there's a couple more, I think, as well. Just doing the initial checks to make sure that there's no little fish hooks that might catch us. Logic those as well.
Just, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we get into questions?
No.
So I'm a little bit confused in terms of the debtors action report, debtors over 90 days. So we look at February for negotiating payment arrangements, and we were talking about $9,500. And all of a sudden it jumps to $25,000, and that number kind of jumped out at me, and I'm trying to work out what was. The numbers don't quite work in my mind. What am I missing?
So I guess the difference between that and that is that since February we've had more billing done. So there was a March billing done.
Right.
Town water. So that would have increased some of those that maybe had outstanding balances. Their new balance is higher, so it's probably included in their balance. And so negotiating with them. And then there's some people that have March was due at the end of April, they've paid it, so during May, the rest of the week to negotiate payment.
I was concerned that there might have been something that had jumped from paying by arrangement, that all of a sudden they had gone backwards. But it's not the case. I didn't imagine Teresa's the kind of person that would allow someone to back away from a commitment, which is exactly what I want.
She's pretty good at making sure that they stick to it.
Good.
Or contacted them multiple times if they don't.
That's good. Okay. Teresa, you're otherwise happy with the direction of travel? Anything that's really concerning you?
No, I'm really happy with the way it is. We're getting some really good traction with different ones now. We've had a few abandoned lands, which we're actually finding sources, which is amazing. Yeah, and we've changed our debt management collection to DMC, Debt Management Central, which are just doing great results.
Right.
They've been really, really great. Yeah.
They're actually very local government. Well, not specifically supposed to do other stuff, but they're actually going quite Lex, I
Yeah,
think it is.
that's, yeah,
So they have got experience.
I've heard very good things about them.
yeah,
Yeah, they're doing
very
really
impressed.
Excellent. Okay, because I'm just conscious of the fact, as I'm sure elected members are as well, that people that don't pay are actually being subsidised by their fellow ratepayers. Okay, good. Thank you, Teresa. Thanks for continuing to maintain your focus on this. It's really excellent. So this is a report for SEEK. I'll move that, seconded by His Worship. Let's turn now to, I think, the next item was going to be the insurance renewal and insurance update. Kaya tells me that Aon will be on the line at 1 o'clock. So what I think we'll do is we'll now move into public excluded. We'll deal with that item and then we will reschedule a meeting to recommence at 1 o'clock. We may in fact have a workshop in between. Okay, all right, so let's deal with the public excluded item first. So this is a resolution to exclude the public for the reasons set out in the recommendation on page 111. I'll move that and seconded by Councillor Jeffries. Okay, so we will now move into public excluded. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Let's, while we're waiting for Aon to come online, let's take a look at the report on insurance from Graham. That is at page item 63. 3 pages. Is there anything, Ross, is this something you can talk to, or is there anyone else who can talk to the report?
I'll have a crack, and then Brendan might be able to answer any specific questions, but essentially what you've got is just noting the cover that's in place until October 2024, and that there's a process underway to support the renewal of that beyond 2024, so for the next year, 24-25. Just note that land and buildings revaluation, as referred to earlier, will be undertaken in the next financial year, and no doubt the outcome of that will be incorporated into future insurance cover reviews. And then we're just awaiting the public liability and professional indemnity quotes, noting that, as previously indicated, Marsh have withdrawn from the personal liability space.
So that is an update to the report of page, paragraph 4.9, where it says staff are currently awaiting quotes from Marsh and Aon for public liability and professional liability responses that nothing is going to be received from Marsh. Correct. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about that update? Okay, on that basis, we'll receive that report. I'll move that as wishful second. Okay. Matthew, good afternoon. Thank you for making yourself available. I understand that Deanna's unwell, so we appreciate you extracting yourself. How would you like to proceed, Matthew? As I understand it, you're going to give us an update on the state of the insurance market from Aon's perspective.
Yes, hopefully you can all hear me okay.
Thank you.
I am working from home today, so I do apologise for the attire, but if any of you have read the Waikato Times today, you probably understand why. Yes, we can go through an update. I have a presentation to share with you, and I was obviously hearing a little bit of the previous conversation. We will be touching on the liabilities and some of the issues in that space at the moment as well. So do you want me to just barrel into this and get the presentation up for you?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind, Matthew.
Yep, okay. Hopefully my technology works. Just bear with me a second. That's the sidebar. So hopefully you can all see the first page there now.
Yes.
Yep, excellent. Look, I'm not sure how much time we have. I'm happy to take questions as we go, or we can save them up till the end, but it's probably about a 15 to 20 minute presentation. And as I say, depending on your time slot, I'm more than happy to answer any questions as we go through or save them up.
So,
yeah,
Matt, my suggestion would be, I've got about 30 minutes in mind, so how about we let you run through unimpeded, and then we'll all save our questions up for the end.
Okay. Absolutely, no problem. Okay, so Deanna does send her apologies. Unfortunately, she's crook today, so you got me. If we go to the next page, well, obviously it's not Deanna. What are we going to talk about? We'll talk about market overview. We'll just very briefly touch on what your current program is, but then I think probably the biggest component to the conversation is going to be around the liability and the issues we've seen there in the last few days. And then we'll also touch a little bit on where we're seeing some emerging risks coming, or a question as to how council handles some of these risks. And it's not about getting answers on these as such. It's just about potential future conversations. So, current market. We have presented to you before, and the last probably 7 years in the insurance market in New Zealand has probably been the toughest market that we've been through. I've been doing insurance in New Zealand now, getting on for 20 years. And the last at least 3 to 5 years have been the hardest market. Historically, when we're talking primarily about property markets here, your insurance program is basically divided into pretty much 3 big spends. And those big spends will be your material damage business interruption policy, which is obviously your assets. There will then be the infrastructure program, for your below ground reticulation assets, and then there's your liabilities. And as I've said, we'll do the liabilities as a whole section for you. So the comments I'm about to make now relate equally to your material damage business interruption and also your infrastructure program. So historically, the drivers from an insurer's point of view for setting premiums and rating on a material damage property or infrastructure program has been earthquake for New Zealand. You know, New Zealand is an earthquake-prone country. We absolutely have earthquake exposures. Some areas are more benign than others, and unfortunately for us, the Waikato is a relatively benign area in regards to this. But what we have seen is, whether you believe in climate change or not, but what we have seen is an increase in frequency and severity over the last probably 10 years of what are referred to as secondary nat cat perils. That is insurance jargon. It's basically secondary natural catastrophe perils. And the slide in front of you gives an example of some of the recent ones. Yes, there are earthquakes in there, but what should also be noted is the increase in frequency and severity of flood events, droughts, wildfires, and of course, we don't have to look too far from a New Zealand point of view to see what the impacts were of Cyclone Gabriel and the Auckland anniversary weekend flooding events, Northland and Auckland. What this means is the insurers are focusing more on the exposure they have to those secondary nat cat events, which has proved troublesome with some markets, and there has been a little bit of a reaction from some markets. Why do we look at this globally? Well, we look at it globally because we take your infrastructure placement, your infrastructure program is basically done out of London. There's not that many markets that are interested in that type of cover. So historically, we had to go to the London markets. There is a little bit of capacity for it within New Zealand, but not much. And from a material damage point of view, so your above ground assets is probably the easiest delineation. All of the insurers that participate in New Zealand are pretty much owned offshore. So all of this stuff feeds back, you know, AIG is an American company, NZI goes back through into Australia, through the IAG group. Vero is Suncorp going back into Australia. So most of the players have obviously an exposure and an interest on a global basis. So these events have been happening. These events have caused some significant losses to the insurance industry as a whole. So we do have to be cognizant of these and what is happening. If we go back a year, so to January 2023 and January 2022, insurers insure. So insurance markets will go off and buy reinsurance. Most of the insurance markets have a 1 January renewal date. And we have at previous presentations to the Waikato group of councils, we have stated that the 2022 and 2023 1 January treaty renewals, as they're referred to, were probably the hardest on record. So if the insurer's costs for reinsurance are increasing, then what happens is an element, not all of it, but some of that cost filters through into the insurance premiums that they charge on a retail basis, as it were. And you will have all have experienced this, whether it's through your own home insurance or your motor insurance or business insurance that you may have. You will have seen this, and obviously we've seen it at a corporate council level. I'm not going to go through all of those points. There is, however, light at the end of the tunnel. Because we have seen an increase in premium pools being generated, the London market specifically is actually quite buoyant at the moment. And we are currently working with some other councils who have a 30 June renewal date. And we have seen rating reductions from the London market for 30 June renewals. That doesn't mean to say your premiums are going to come down. And I'll caveat that statement. Your premiums are basically a function of whatever your total declared values are with a rate percent applied to that value. If the rate percent comes down and your values stay the same, then yes, you would see in principle some form of rating reduction, which would then in turn lead to some form of premium reduction. However, the market is a little bit two-speed. London is reacting earlier in terms of easing of rates than the local markets. So part of what we are doing in the renewal process for this year, so your program is largely due 1 November, part of what we're doing with that is looking at how best to involve the London markets and the local markets to get the best pricing and terms and conditions for you. What needs to be understood is that whilst London has started to ease, their actual base rate level starts a bit higher than New Zealand. So it may not be, even with reductions from London, that the average rate on the program comes down. But the good news is we're not expecting it to go up. And that's a comment for New Zealand and London. We think it is at worst going to be pretty flat in terms of rating. There are a number of reasons why that is happening, and there are new markets coming into the putting their hands up to write the sort of business that councils have and get involved in these programs, and that's always a good thing, because if you get new players coming into the market, whereas 2 years ago there was an absolute paucity of underwriters, we were struggling to fill the required amount of cover for you. We are now hopefully in a position where we will in essence be oversubscribed, and what I mean by that is there isn't one insurer on your infrastructure program or material damage program who provides all of the cover. It's made up of multiple insurers, and each of them will take a percentage of the risk. The objective from a marketing strategy when doing this is if we need to buy 100%, we look to get terms for say 110, 120%, then we can pick and choose the best priced capital within that 100% that we need, and then you will see benefits of that from a premium point of view. They are still focusing very heavily on quality information, and it's an ongoing conversation we have with all clients, not just councils. We do need to still provide them with really good quality data so that they can differentiate you between the hundreds of other clients that come across their desk. So whereas before, when I've done these presentations, it's all been doom and gloom, and yes, rates are going to go up by 15%, Actually, it's not that conversation this year. We think at the worst case scenario, it's going to be flat, and hopefully we will see some rating reductions. As I said, doesn't necessarily directly relate to a premium reduction because it's then dependent upon what your values do. And that is the other horrible part of the process that we've been in collectively over the last 3 years, is those inflationary pressures globally from geopolitical issues, supply chain issues, etc. Although we do understand those are easing now. So we might see a lesser impact from that. So to summarize, from a MDBI infrastructure point of view, it seems as though the market is turning. It seems as though we might be able to get oversubscribed, and it seems as though we're going to hopefully be looking at some rating reductions for parts of the program, which is ultimately good news. this is just an example from a report that we get as to what the market overview is like. We put it up there because there's a lot more orange in there than there was last year. There's still a little bit of red, but that is diminishing. That does say, this was issued at the beginning of the year, it does say on there that pricing is sort of plus 1 to 10%. That's a little bit outdated now from what we've seen. There will be a new report coming out shortly to take into account Q1 and Q2, so we'll see that change. And this is referencing other policies, so not just your property programs. So automobile, that's flattening as well. So motor insurance is flattening. Cyber directors and officers, they're actually, the markets have turned quite considerably. So that's good news there. I'm going to ignore the casualty liability because there is a very specific conversation we need to have with councils, which will be the next couple of slides. So overall, it's getting better than it was. And that is good news. It's been a hard market cycle is normally between 3 to 5 years, and we've pretty much had 7 years of it. So it's finally turning. This is just a summary of what your current premium spends are and your current declared values. It does not include your professional indemnity and public liability because we haven't placed that for you in the past. But this is just going to the point, as you can see, that the majority of your premium spend is within 2 or 3 policies, the material damage, the infrastructure, and the liability. So again, hopefully we will see some easing in the motor, we'll see some easing in the infrastructure and material damage. The other policies there, crime, statutory liability, employer's liability, and personal accident, they're going to be flat. There's the market is such that they'll be flat and or possible reductions. So they do make up a small portion of the total program, but we're not going to see any increases in those, which again is good news, because we are very aware of affordability issues on insurance with councils at the moment. It's the single biggest topic of conversation we have. Liabilities. Okay, so this is a whole different conversation. I think it was maybe 10 days ago. It certainly was a Friday. You received an email from your incumbent broker around the liability program saying that they had lost support of the markets they used, and basically said to you, you need to go away and get an alternative. We were obviously contacted very quickly by yourselves. We're in the process of getting those alternatives. I know everybody wants to have some certainty about what is happening. I have a call after this, probably about 1:45, with a colleague of mine who's been, the 3 of us have been leading the process. We think we have a solution in place and we'll be able to report back to you, if not this afternoon, tomorrow. That will be for a primary layer of cover at this stage for $15 million. Now, the current placements that Aon do for its other councils who we do everything for, including the liabilities, we have a primary layer within New Zealand of $15 million each for public liability and professional indemnity. We then procure an excess layer placement out of London for $145 million in excess of that $15 million, which gives a total of 160. The historic scheme that you are currently in or were in had a limit of indemnity of $300 million. That limit of indemnity is derived from the fact that that scheme also provided or provides cover for certainly Australia, and I also think Canada, where the risk exposure and the operations of councils is somewhat different. The primary thing there in terms of risk exposure is both of those geographies, you have personal injury exposure. ACC removes a very large chunk of the personal injury exposure from New Zealand. And when we go to London to present liability terms for these excess layer markets, we are very, very clear and highlight the differences between councils in the UK, for example, councils in Canada, councils in Australia, and councils in New Zealand in regards to what you do and what you are responsible for. So the 300 million is it's a moot point. I have to be careful. I can't say categorically, but it would be incredibly unlikely that there would be a claim in New Zealand for anywhere near that figure. And that's taking into account the Wellingtons and the Aucklands. Certainly for a smaller provincial council, I just can't see it happening, to be honest with you. So we are working with the London markets to see what we can get in terms of the excess layer. The catalyst to a lot of this has been the Napier risk pool decision. I probably won't go into all of the details around that at the moment, but basically it was a leaky building claim or weather tightness claim, and risk pool worked on the theory that the building defect exclusion would apply to the entire building, because the principal reason for the claim was weather tightness, and weather tightness is excluded. That is not a position that is argued. However, quite often when you have these weather tightness claims, what you then get are secondary and tertiary defects. They tend to be something along the lines of fire stopping, other components to the structure of the building, incorrect materials used, and our program will provide cover for those secondary and tertiary losses. It has always provided cover for those secondary and tertiary losses. That is how we explain the exclusion to the insurers that we use, and they have understood that. Bristol, JLT, and then Marsh, because it sort of morphed through various schemes, have applied. We understand that the exclusion is for the entire building and will therefore exclude the secondary and tertiary issues. The risk pool versus Napier decision basically overturned that application, and it would appear there are a number of legacy issues that are now going to be revisited, which has impacted the market's attitude. The position we are hopefully going to be in within the next day is that we will be able to provide you with an option for a minimum of $15 million, and we will continue to be working towards an option to get those additional excess layers stacked on top of it. Our big concern is that we cannot let you be in a position where by 30th of June you do not have anything. So we are absolutely working our damnedest to get that resolved. And as I say, in the next day or so, we should be there. Unfortunately, the pricing will not be on par with what you have paid previously. And I cannot and will not hide from that fact. You are going to see an increase in the premiums. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that the previous placements have probably been underpriced and are trying to catch up. The other one is the main insurer that we use on this has committed to be in the council sector for the long haul. And they did a lot of actuarial work a couple of years ago and came to the conclusion that in order for them to stay in it for the long haul, they needed to get a sufficient premium pool from the council sector. I will know more on pricing, but I would conservatively suggest that whatever, I don't know what you paid last year for your PLPI, but I would be expecting for it to double. And I know that's probably not very palatable news, but that's the reality. And I'm not going to shy away from that fact or sugarcoat that in any way. I think we have to be absolutely transparent. So that's a summary of where we're at with the liabilities. Last slide, I do have another one. I won't go into too much detail for time reasons. The last slide is basically just to start a conversation. And Aon run a number of forums for councils every year. And this particular topic was one that we covered off. Global Risk Management Survey is something that Aon does, as it suggests, on a global basis. And the list that you can see in front of you there are the top 12 public sector risks from around the world. Now, it doesn't come out very clearly on the slide, but there are actually different shades of grey in there. Some of those risks you can insure and do insure. Some of those risks are partially insurable, and some of those risks are not insurable. So when you work it out, it's roughly, there is actually a list of 60 of these identified areas. When you work it out, it's about a 70-30 split in you can insure 30% of your risks that you face as an organization. There's about 70% of them that you can't insure. And that's not because it's you or a council, it's just there isn't an insurance product that will deal with something like failure to meet customers' needs or failure to innovate. Now, the reason we raise this is one of the conversations we want to start having with councils is, given the affordability issues around insurance programs, hopefully that may be easing with the market changes, but we've just discussed liability issues. What is council's attitude towards risk management on a holistic basis? And if we said that you've got $10 to spend on risk management, what is the most effective way for council to apply that $10? Is it to spend all of that $10 on buying an insurance product that will cover effectively 30% of your exposure? Possible exposure, I shouldn't be so categoric, possible exposure. Or is it better that you maybe take that $10 and go, okay, well, we'll spend 50% of that $10 on insurance programs, and then we'll think about what we can do to mitigate the impacts of the other issues that we have with the remaining 50% of that $10. As I say, this is just a raising the conversation point. It is about trying to be a little bit more cognizant of the broader risk conversation and how insurance products can help, or how risk management can help in that space. It's not taking anything away from the work that is being done by people within your organisation currently. It's just trying to, I suppose, for want of a better word, increase the sophistication around that point through the sector. So this isn't a conversation that's directed entirely at yourselves. This is one we're having with an Auckland or a Wellington or a Carroll or whoever it may be. We just want to try and elevate that conversation a little bit. And it's a work in progress. That's actually the end of the sort of formal part of the presentation. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I'll stop sharing the screen. Hopefully you can see me now. So I know that.
Thanks, Matt. That's great. And I think members have just received a copy of the slides, which is much easier to read than looking at it on the screen. So thanks for getting those through, Kai. Questions. Should we start with your question, Nadia? It may well be one that probably is not able to be answered now because it sounds like the liability issue is still in flux. But did you want to ask the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm slightly off screen here. Sorry, Matthew. It's Nadia Gower, Group Manager, Strategy and Community. We're looking at our community-led events processes and applications. And one of our current conditions is that they organise their own public liability insurance. And that, as I'm sure you know, can be tricky and expensive for small communities like ours, yet we still want to have events. One of the questions that has come from councillors is whether council's public liability insurance could cover a third-party organised event, if you like. So while we might say, yes, you can have your event on our parks, but you run and organise it, is it possible to have to use our insurance cover for their event?
I have seen an email with this question, and I apologise for not getting back to you on it yet, but I can do, and I will provide something in writing to you shortly. I have to say the events of the last few days with us having to try and find an alternative has sort of taken precedent. But there is actually a relatively simple answer to your question, although I will do an email. Short answer is if it is a community group, i.e. it is not a trading company, then we can accommodate those community groups under your public liability policy under something called, it's a slightly antiquated term, but it's called a haul hires insurance. So it will provide an element of cover to those community groups if they're using one of your facilities and or locations. And I'll go into this in more detail for you in an email, but the broad brush answer is yes, you can. The limitation with haul hirers is if it is a commercial entity. So if Aon approached you and said, we would like to use one of your halls or one of your facilities to run an event, then the haul hirers wouldn't apply. It is designed for community groups, not companies, not organizations that you would expect to have something. So if it's a local society of something, or somebody's getting married and they want to use one of your facilities, that sort of thing. Some charitable organizations, but most charitable organizations I would expect to have some cover. So it is there as a bit of a backstop, but we can give you a more detailed answer on that, absolutely.
Thank you, Matthew. I guess, and I probably wasn't very clear in the email, the events that we mostly deal with are ones that are in parks or public spaces like that, not in facilities. So or halls. So when you say facilities, does that also include open public spaces like parks?
It's exactly the question I'm working on right now.
Okay.
Our hope is that yes, it will. I'm doing something similar for Hamilton at the moment as well. So we're trying to get the insurer to look. Councils are about the community. We don't want insurance to get in the way of community events taking place, but also we don't want to put too much of an unfair burden on the community. And if you have a group who come to you and say, we want to use one of the parks to, I don't know, run a fun run or something, whatever it may be, we don't want insurance to be the thing that stops it from happening. So I will know a little bit later on about the extent of that. Traditionally, a haul hires policy is literally a facility, but we are trying to get that out into sort of council spaces or council authorised spaces.
Thank you, Matthew. I look forward to that email. I guess possibly one that you can't, a question that you might not be able to answer just yet because you haven't done the work, is does that additional cover come at an increased premium?
No, if we get it, it's going to be included in whatever the pricing is. I probably didn't explain it very well when I spoke about the liabilities. The issue that has got us to the situation that we're in with liability insurance is not a public liability issue. It is a professional indemnity issue, and it is largely building consenting. The actual public liability insurance exposure for local authorities, and just for the sake of clarity, public liability is providing cover for you for loss or damage that you may do through your negligence to a third party person or property, is actually very low. The nature of what you do, the services that you provide, they are all largely low level. The issues we have with the liability placements are entirely down to the professional indemnity and building consents and building regulations. So to answer your question, would it be included in the price? Yes, it would. Is it costing you an awful lot more money to include that in the price? No, it's just being thrown in from the insurer's perspective if we can get it to extend to open spaces.
Lovely. Thanks, Matthew.
Are there any other questions?
Just one. Hi, Matthew. It's Kit Jeffries here.
Nice to
hello,
see you
again. Nice to see an old face again. Excuse the.
Yep. Likewise.
Yeah. Hey, just a quickie. In terms of the uninsured risks that we have, what of those risks, in your view, are sort of the ones that we need to seriously think about looking at and insuring? So have there been any claims on those types of risks from other sources that would suggest that maybe it's an area that we should be looking at?
I'm going to be a little pedantic, There is a world of difference between uninsured and uninsurable. So the 70-30 comment is largely around what is insurable and what is uninsurable, and what the financial impacts are for those uninsurable losses. I will come back to the uninsured versus insured, but where we have seen this is, for example, you take the cyclone and you get a funding for roads that are your responsibility in the region. I can't remember the exact number that NZTA provide, and I think they're looking at changing how they're doing the funding on that. We don't insure land. Land is an uninsurable thing. So what happened with the councils who were affected by the cyclone is, yes, they had a whole bundle of property that was insured and damaged, but they also had an awful lot of landslips. They also had an awful lot of roading taken out, and the landslips they need to rectify, or they've got to do something with. So that's not an insured thing. If it causes damage to a structure, then yes, the structure's covered, but the damage to the land itself is not an insured thing. The huge amount of money that they're having to find for funding the roads is not an insured thing. Roads are uninsurable at the moment. They're sort of two that leap out, and they are just the physical things. So that is a physical damage, a physical issue. Other things that we see are, how do you recruit and retain staff? I mean, we're all gone through a process. I mean, I certainly know that Aon are short-staffed and we're trying to get people. How do you recruit and hold on to staff? That's a pretty important factor for a risk analysis. In terms of the uninsured versus insured, probably the one, there are two that I would look at. One would be cyber liability. Is one to consider. We are seeing an increase in the frequency of those events at the moment, and there's some interesting reasons why that happens, but again, I can provide some commentary on this subsequent to this meeting. And the other one is something called environmental impairment liability. Environmental impairment liability is basically pollution and contamination, unless it happens from a sudden event, is not insured under a public liability policy. If it is a gradual pollution or a gradual contamination, then that is an uninsured thing under a public liability policy. You can buy something called environmental impairment. It has been expensive, and it does have some limitations to it, but what it provides cover for is not only third-party losses, so, you know, other people, but also first-party costs. And I will give you an example of something that would be a scenario. Leachate from a closed landfill site. So you've got a closed landfill site somewhere, I think it's methane, but let's say something leaks out of that old landfill site, causes a problem to farmers' fields, to a housing development, whatever it may be that's nearby the closed site, and there are a whole bundle of rectification costs and or cleanup costs involved. Because that is a gradual thing, it's not covered under a public liability policy. If you had an environmental impairment policy, you could claim for not only the potential costs from a third party, but also for your first party costs that you have to spend on fixing that problem. That's just one example. There are others, but those would be the two primary ones I would look at.
Thanks, Matthew.
Excellent, thank you.
Other questions?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Matthew, in the combined employers and statutory liability, could you give me some examples of injuries that would come from the employer's liability arising out of claims made by employees for injury outside the scope of the ACC Corporation?
That's a really good question. I think you can see me. I probably have a smile on my face. There are technically some. I've been in New Zealand 20 years. I've never seen an employer's liability claim from a council. The ones that normally you would associate it with are such things as these are just specific examples, but it shows the concept is there's something called industrial white finger or vibration white finger. This is where people are using machines over a period of time and they end up with nerve damage in their hands. That isn't necessarily an ACC thing because it's a slow, gradual occurrence. And if the employer is found to have been negligent in some way in managing that situation, that could possibly be a claim. The other one is industrial deafness. Those are the two that I always use as an example. There are others. Employers' liabilities tend to be few and far between. Employer liability claims tend to be few and far between. When they do happen, they can be reasonably pricey. But it's sort of stuff that falls outside of the ACC remit.
Thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Councillor Prendergast. Other questions of Matthew? Okay, a fair bit to think about, I think, particularly for Graham and Brendan in the context of the insurance program for this year. And I think a couple of really good questions from Councillor Prendergast and Councillor Jeffries in terms of thinking about what the portfolio of cover might look like in the future. Clearly a glimmer of hope in relation to public liability. So it'll be interesting to see where Matthew ends up in the context of public spaces as opposed to facilities in respect of community groups. So that will be interesting. But in the meantime, Matthew, we really appreciate you stepping in for Diana. I hope she gets well soon, and there's no doubt that we'll be continuing to talk to you as the program builds. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. I would just say one last thing, if I may. I know we're busy. We are looking at a number of alternatives and different ways to break the entire portfolio down from a material damage and business interruption point of view to mitigate costs on premiums, such things as deductible levels, asset selection. This is something that we're working with the team on at the moment.
Thank you. That's helpful.
All right.
All the best.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay. A couple of comments that I'll make, but I think what we'll do now is we're at the point now where we can vote to close the meeting. Kaya. So I'll declare the meeting closed and then we'll get into a conversation with the Chief Executive. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.